The collective world ego has many connections to this, and one way of seeing it is the narcissism epidemic, which I think has a lot of the same sources, like the lack of community and so forth. And in the interest of full disclosure, I mentioned this throughout my writings. I'm a narcissistic personality myself, which is the ruling personality type of the day. I try and work on compensating for it, and I've never had, by the way, a much more serious condition called narcissistic personality disorder. Sometimes people confuse those two. That's somebody like Steve Jobs. People who have narcissistic personality disorder, it's almost can almost be like psychopaths in the way that they mistreat others and are completely disinterested in what other people are feeling or experiencing and so forth. So the collective ego has become a narcissistic ego. And that's especially true in America, for example. And so therefore, in narcissism, if you're a narcissist and the more narcissistic you are, the more you have lost an awareness of a spiritual ground, because you're more into looking out for number one than being aware of oneness and of being connected to other living things. So you naturally become more and more, often without realizing it, vampiric, because the world is your oyster. It's there to feed you. It's like a young Hispanic, maybe it was Italian guy, told me a few years ago, when I asked him, like, so what do you want out of life, or what are your goals, or something like that. He said, like, well, I just want to take a big bite out of life. And that's a common saying. I just want to take a big bite out of life. And I said, well, actually, we've got enough human beings taking big bloody bites out of life. We need people to put some stuff back in. But this is kind of the modern personality type, is I'm a free agent. I don't owe anybody anything. I'm a rugged individual. They forget that, like all mammals, we were completely helpless infants taking care of others. I don't owe anybody anything. I'm here to look out for number one, and then they proceed from that basis, and that's basically a vampiric predatory, vampiric/predatory basis from which to proceed, and that is almost a conventional, that is almost the collective ego. But you can also have what Jung would call a collective psychosis, like what happened with the Nazis, and where you can start to also consider, and I'm sure Jung considered this because he was a Gnostic as well, that these collective psychoses might be to some extent generated by archons or something else. With the way that the Germans became, or many Germans became, possessed by collective psychosis. And Jung started to observe this working as a psychoanalyst in the Weimar Republic in pre-war Germany, where he noticed that his educated German patients were starting to have dreams where Wotan, a Germanic god of war and mayhem, were appearing. He called it Wotanism because it was such a striking phenomenon. He began to predict that something like, Hitler and the Nazis would appear. So you can have a collective psychosis, and we always do. We have different cults, or we have different groups who seem possessed by something that makes them act in a parasitic way. So I think that the group that I would most identify with this, I know it's sort of politically incorrect on the left right now, are Islamic fundamentalists, who are so oppressive to their own women and have a world-conquering agenda that they've had for quite a long time, before there was an Israel or a corporation or a U.S. government. They almost took over Europe because of their desire for a global jihad. They were stopped outside the gates of Vienna on September 11th of something like 1626. But this is a group where there are overlaps with the Nazis, because you can see pictures of Hezbollah, with the Nazi salute. Then the Muslim Brotherhood, Hitler and the Nazis recognized allies in the Muslim Brotherhood and worked with them during World War II. And so this group is a group that I think has a collective psychosis. I mean, one of them, for example, said at the time of after September 11th, some imam or something said, well, Americans should be careful, because just as much as your men, young men, desire life, our young men desire martyrdom. They desire death, in other words. So you can have a group where that goes into a kind of death energy frenzy. And we see this occurring, and there's always some group that is carrying this at a particular time. Maybe it's a saucer cult that commits collective suicide or whatever it is. Human groups can get a collective psychosis going where they seem to have this blood frenzy aspect, and where it's very hard to explain conventionally. In fact, when I started writing about mind parasites, I was like reading a book called something like Eyewitness Accounts of History. And I noticed that these eyewitness accounts, some of which went back thousands of years, but went all the way up into contemporary time, how the over-the-top aspect of human evil that was just so hard to explain conventionally. Like an example is that in Stalinist Russia, and here we have a country, talk about the key person thing, here we have a country ruled by a total full-blown psychopath, Joseph Stalin. And where, what are they spending so much of their time doing but killing and imprisoning their own fellow citizens? Not only their own species, but their own fellow citizens who are racially in every way identical to them. And like a typical thing that's pointed out, maybe this was some like report by Solzhenitsyn or something, is that what the KGB would do, and this is a time when millions and millions of Russians were killed or put in gulags because they weren't pure enough communists, or for whatever, or for totally nonsensical reasons, is they would find somebody that they would decide they're going to denounce, who may not have even committed any sin against Orthodox communism or anything, but they've just sort of picked this person. And then a couple of KGB guys would go and like buy him drinks all night in a bar, pretending to be his new best friends, and then suddenly and unexpectedly, after the eighth drink or something, denounce him and drag him off to the gulag. And so what's the purpose of any of that? There's no practical or purpose, even from the point of view of a totalitarian state, in taking this person who is trying to be a good communist. And certainly there was no point in buying him drinks all night and pretending to be friends, unless the purpose is to create terror. This may be the idea of terrorism, which is also often done by states as well as insurgent groups. Is you want to create terror. That's the food. That's the finished product. That's what you're aiming at. That's the reason to buy somebody drinks all night, and then suddenly, when they're in the most vulnerable state, reverse all that. It's more horrible, but it serves no practical purpose. And so these are examples of where the collective ego can be the parasite, and where people can create these sort of nightmarish bardo worlds, like said to exist in the lower astral, right here on this earth, create those collectively. And some people would say that that's what capitalism devolves into, where you have parasite-riddled situations. Any individual or collective that is not living by a healthy mythology, in other words, one that would also partake of the spiritual dimension, has a weakened immune system and will be subject to vampiric attacks, or become itself psychotic and vampiric in itself. And like the British historian Arnold Toynbee, who studied the life cycle of civilizations, and he wanted to find out like what makes civilizations rise, what triggers a decline in a civilization, because they all seem to have a lifespan. And what he discovered was that as soon as a civilization no longer had a ruling mythology, it was in decline. And to really be healthy, a collective or an individual needs a healthy mythology. And materialists don't have that. And if you can see people's mythologies, it'll sometimes even show up on a bumper sticker. Like here's an example of 2 bumper stickers I've seen on cars in America. He who dies with the most toys wins. Okay, so that's what you're living for. Here's another one. This was actually in a ad slogan for, I think it was Schlitz beer. And there was an ad that ran in the 60s when I was growing up. And it would show like, some self-satisfying looking, guy, maybe let's say wealthy looking middle-aged guy on a yacht with a beer and a Schlitz beer in his hand and maybe some young hot blonde hotties around him or whatever. And the slogan, the saying was always, you only go around once in this old world, so you got to grab for all the gusto while you can.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole unhealthy mythology in that one ad slogan. You only go around once. There's no reincarnation. The physical life is all there is. And so what should you do in response to that? Just be a selfish hedonist. Grab for all the gusto while you can. So there's an example of a mind parasite that was playing on a TV throughout my childhood. Most people are spending their energy, and a way to see what you're spending your energy on is, what do you spend money on? What do you spend your time on? And so if you are spending your energy on unsustainable things, like you're buying, expending energy to buy junk food that doesn't sustain your body, but just leaves you fat and malnourished and perpetually hungry because you're never getting what you need, then you're volunteering to be part of a parasite cycle. If you're addicted to cigarettes, in your diminished lifespan, you're going to be giving Philip Morris or some tobacco company about several $100,000 of income through this parasitic habit. And so we are constantly falling into these energetically unsustainable transactions and perpetuating parasitic cycles thereby.